Hello, everybody. Looks like we got a couple people joining us for our regular weekly question and answer. I'm your host, Jasper Blake. I'm the head coach here at the My Endurance Hub space. And as always, great to see some people popping in. We'll give it about 30, 60 seconds here just to let other people join who might be on their way. Like I say every week, we've had such a tremendous response to these question and answers, and it's really encouraging. What's even more encouraging is the growth at which we are experiencing here at the My Endurance Hub. It's so exciting. I can't even. I'm kind of at a loss for words, to be honest, which is weird. I know, but it's so exciting. What it's telling me is that there's a real need and a desire and a want for this type of community, and I find that really encouraging. It's my passion. It's been my passion since forever. Endurance sports in general. So it's really exciting to see how many members we've been getting joining us, and we're going to have a really special announcement probably in the next couple of days that I'm excited to deliver. So stay tuned for that. Like always, if you want to ask a question, the best way is to go to the chat function. So you'll find that bottom right of your screen. It's like a little chat bubble. You can also raise your hand. I say that every week. No one's ever done it. So maybe go the chat bubble because I might miss the raise your hand function. But without further ado, let's get cracking here because we have, I think, some questions coming in already. A reminder that these are recorded. Now, there's no worries because it's really only my face and voice that are recorded. And the questions that you'll submit will be via, typing it in. But if you do want to check out the episode after, or maybe there was some content that you thought a friend or family member might be interested in, you can find these at the back end of the My Endurance Hub space. We record them all and then we release them so that you can check them out later. A really great way to maybe review some of the answers that I gave or send somebody this way if you think they might be interested. So let's get cracking here. We have James and Devin. Thanks for joining us, you guys. That's awesome. First question here comes from James. James says, how long does it take to recover from an Ironman? James, that's a really great question. And a lot of the people that I work with have the same question. And here's the trap that we fall into. Often people will do an Ironman and they'll kind of exist on this high for a few days after, and they think that everything's totally awesome. And then they start getting the fitness from the actual race itself. So maybe they're starting to recover and they're starting to feel amazing because the race itself, that 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-hour effort adds to your fitness. People forget that. And so they start to feel a little bit almost invincible, maybe, a week or two later. But I always like to caution people. I think it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to recover fully from an Ironman. Now, I'll put an asterisk beside that. Everybody is different. So this is, your age in the sport. So maybe you're brand new to the sport. This is your first Ironman. You've been doing the sport for 1 or 2 years. It might take you longer to recover. It might take quite a while. Maybe you've been doing this for 2 decades, you're a professional and you have tons of training load in your body, and maybe you recover a little quicker. Now, there were some studies that came out probably in the late 80s, early 90s. I'll see if I can track them down, that found the micro damage kind of at a muscular level actually takes about 3 weeks post Ironman, but it was also post marathon. So another thing to be really clear on is I think the recovery time also depends on how hard you run that marathon. Now, swimming 3.8K for most people, most swim clubs, even if you're fairly new, you'll probably bang out, a couple K in a swim session. So the swim section of it, the 3.8K, is not that taxing. That does not take a ton of time to recover from. When I was training as a pro for many years, it was rare that a swim workout was ever less than 4 kilometers or 4,000 meters. So, that part of it was quite easy. Now, the 180K bike, same deal. It's a big effort, but there's no impact. And so often we can recover from the bike section very quickly as well. It's the marathon that gets people into trouble, and it's the impact load that gets people into trouble. So if I ran a good hard marathon, I had a great Ironman and I ran like to my capacity, um, it would take me probably 3 weeks to feel, normal again, especially in the legs, where I took on all that impact. However, in the events where maybe it didn't go quite as well, or maybe I was, walking through some of the aid stations, or, maybe had a big chunk of walking, which was actually rare, but, it happened. I would recover much more quickly from those. And I think it's because the marathon itself, was not as taxing. So, you know, we used to say too, it takes as long to recover from just a marathon as it does from an Ironman, because really the main recovery needs to come from the run section of it. So, like most of my answers, there's like most of the questions I get, there's multiple answers. There's not a one size fits all. But what I would urge is some caution. So if you're new to the game and you're just doing your first Ironman, don't plan a race 2 weeks later. Take some time off after, celebrate what you just did, and let the body recover. The thing I haven't talked about as well is the mental and emotional recovery. It takes a lot of willpower to get through the training. It takes a lot of kind of discipline, and we need a break from that as well. We need a mental and emotional break as well. So do not discount the time it takes to recover emotionally, mentally, as well as physically. Physical is the most obvious because you'll be sore generally, and tired. But mental and emotional is really, really important factor as well. Some people experience what we call the Ironman blues. So, a few days after the race, you'll be feeling a little bit low. Part of that's, you're probably not exercising as much, so you're not getting that same endorphin rush, but you're also coming down from this enormous effort. And it's important to respect that. Some people almost feel a little bit depressed post Ironman. I certainly did. I would ride high for a day or two after, and then probably for the 5 days after that, I felt really crummy. I wasn't training as much, and just kind of felt a little bit off mentally. And I used to struggle a bit. And I think that's a fairly normal thing. So, really great question, James. Thank you for asking that. I think it's an important one to ask, especially if you're going to do an Ironman. James, I'd love to know if you have, maybe you just did an Ironman and that's why you're asking the question, or maybe you got one coming up. I'd love to know. Devin says, "Hey, can you talk about optimal gears for cycling uphill, downhill, coasting, etc.? I'm not sure how to best set up my gears." Oh my gosh, Devin, such a good question. And I think it's a good question because typically new cyclists or new triathletes, they don't understand necessarily how much we should be shifting gears. So bike technology's come a long way. When I first started racing, I think I had 7 gears on the back and 2 on the front. So maybe a total of, say, 14 gears on my bike. Now we have 11 speed cassettes. So some of the newer bikes will have 11 or maybe even 12. Are we up to 12 yet? Gosh, I should know that. 11 or 12 plus 2 rings at the front. So now you have 24 gears. You have lots of gears to work with. Here's the best way to think about it. What you want to do is hold yourself to a certain effort and a certain RPM. So there will be a cadence or an RPM. So how fast those legs are spinning, there'll be an optimal range for you. So let's say it's 85 to 90 RPM. We kind of get old school mentality a little bit, is that 90 RPM is the most efficient. Well, no, it's like everything, it's different for everybody, but the range that's probably decent is about 80 to 95 for most people. If you get too high in RPM or cadence, it takes some coordination, you're spinning really fast. And if you get too low muscularly, it's a little bit harder. That's a whole other conversation. So you want to kind of hold yourself to a nice tidy RPM range. For the sake of this conversation, let's say it's 85 to 90 RPM. But you also want to match that with an effort output. So however you're measuring effort, let's say you're measuring effort through wattage, which is the gold standard for cycling, or heart rate, which is also great. Or perceived effort. Perceived effort, we should never discount how valuable that is as well. So for the sake of this argument, let's say you have a power meter on your bike, something that measures the power, and you're doing a long ride, and the goal is to be between 200 and 210 watts for that ride, and you want to hold yourself nice and tidy at about 85 to 90 RPM. So Devin, to answer your question, those are the 2 parameters that we want to try and adhere to as much as possible for this particular example. So then you'll want to shift gears constantly in and around that to maintain those other 2 parameters. So let's say I'm coming up to a slight incline where I'm going uphill. So in order to maintain 85 to 90 RPM and 200 watts, I need to shift into an easier gear. Likewise, I'm starting to go downhill. In order to maintain that tidy little effort and RPM range, I want to shift gears into a harder gear so uh, that I can maintain those two parameters. Now, that's one example. Let's say maybe an endurance ride. You're going to ride at 200 watts for 2 hours, and it's your endurance ride, provided that's the right wattage for you. Now, let's say you're going to go do hill reps and you're on a steeper incline. It might call for 300 watts for 3 minutes. And ideally, that RPM range is 75 to 85, let's say. Going uphill, typically we sometimes run out of gears. So that's a fairly normal thing. If you're climbing on a hill and your easiest gear has you at 50 RPM, either that hill might be too steep for you, or you need to get some lighter gears. So that's something to consider. I think my point is this: when you're on a ride with varied terrain, you will probably be shifting gears a lot. In the beginning, it's going to feel really weird because you're going to have to sort of think about it a lot. It won't come naturally. But with time, you won't even think about it anymore. It's like an automatic car. An automatic car is just shifting gears and you're not really thinking about it. If you drive stick shift, if you're like old like me and you grew up driving stick shift, in the beginning, you have to be really mindful and conscious about shifting those gears. But over time, you kind of don't think about it anymore. So I drove a stick shift until about 4 years ago. And I wouldn't even think about it. My foot would operate the clutch and my hands doing the gearing, and it was second nature. It was just kind of like driving itself. And the same is true with biking. In the beginning, you have to be more mindful, more conscious of it, thinking ahead a little bit more. But with time, those hand movements to shift gears to keep you in the right place, they happen much more naturally, and eventually you really don't even think about it. Devin, give me a thumbs up if you feel like that answered that question. And let me just sort of dive in a little bit more here. So you asked about coasting. So, coasting really is only something you're going to do if, you're going down a hill that's so steep you run out of gears. So maybe you don't have a hard enough gear to push. Maybe you're coming into a turn, so you need to stop pedaling so that inside leg can be up, so that when the bike leans over, you're not going to hit your crank arm on the ground. So that might be coasting. Maybe you're coasting into a stop sign or coasting into a stoplight. Maybe you're riding with a group of people and you have to let off the pedaling a little bit, just to manage your space between people. Generally speaking, however, let's say you're on a flat road and you're all by yourself and you're adhering to those effort parameters and RPM parameters that I talked about. There really should be no coasting. You shouldn't pedal like really hard for 10 pedals and then coast, and then pedal hard for 10 pedals and coast. No, in cycling, we want to have a nice, consistent rhythm. The legs should always be moving. I had an old cycling coach many, many years ago who would get furious at us if he ever saw that our legs were not moving. Even on a descent where we ran out of gears, he would encourage us to keep the legs moving. Because if you suddenly stop pedaling for 30, 60 seconds, and then you have to get those legs moving again, it's not a really great feeling. So he would encourage us, even on the descents where we had no more gears left. He'd be like, keep moving your legs, keep those legs warm, keep them in that same rhythm. Obviously, there'll be no pressure on the chain at that point, but you're keeping that action happening. So aim to be as steady and as consistent as you possibly can in that regard. Devin, I hope that answered that question for you. And then Devin follows it up with, and how do I determine the right tire pressure for my bike? This is another great question. Okay, so it's important to know a little bit of the history of tires and tire pressure. When I was racing in the 90s, early 2000s, we used to have what were called tubular tires. And this is the tire I would race on. So this was a tire that had the tube of the tire was sewn into the tire itself. And we could pump those things up to like 170 PSI. The more, the better. Now, even at the time, more was not necessarily better because the tire becomes so hard that it actually has a little bit of slippage. So that was not good. But, as a young kind of early 20s, bit naive and a more is better type person, like lots of us are, I would crank the tire pressure to the max that it said that tire could go to. And that was like 170 psi. It was bonkers. Now, a lot's changed. So, in my race wheels, I would have this specific type of tire where you could pump it up really, really, really high. We would train on tires called clincher tires. Now, this is more typical, where you have a tube that's inside the tire. If you kind of pry the tire off of the rim of your bike, you can see the tube. So if you get a puncture, if you get a hole in that tube, you can remove that tube and put a new one in. And so the typical tire pressure we would run for those back in, when I was racing, say 95 to 105, 110 psi. Now, tires have become a lot bigger. So the example I gave with the really high pressure, we would be running tires that were really, really thin. Like they were just these tiny little things, because the mindset was that a thinner tire, less friction, higher pressure, less friction, it'll move faster. But now tires are a lot bigger, and they actually run, a lot of the tires will run on what's called tubeless. So there's not even a tube in there. The tire seals itself to the rim, and they put this liquid inside that will kind of stop slow, like little punctures. It's mountain biking's had this for years, but it's kind of transitioned over into road tires. Now these tires are a lot thicker than what I used to race on, and the tire pressure as such can be a lot lower. So people will run like 80 psi, 80 pounds per square inch. It's a lot softer. The tire is a lot bigger, and it's a little counterintuitive, because the old school person in me is anchored with this idea that we need really skinny tires at really high pressure to go really fast. It's not the case anymore. A lot of studies have shown, and the overwhelming sort of prevailing thought in this moment is that a little bit of a wider tire, so a little bit bigger of a tire, and run it at lower pressure. And guess what? The rolling resistance is the same, if not better, than the old school tires. So that's the first part of this question. It depends what kind of tire you're running. It depends what kind of wheel you're using. If you got this bike from a bike shop, I would go in and say, if you really don't know what you're looking at, say, what kind of tire is this? What kind of pressure should I run? Now, part of it is also dependent on your own personal body weight. So my son's a cyclist. He's 15 years old, but he's tiny, tiny little guy. And so he's not going to run the same tire pressure as someone like me, who's a little bit bigger. He's going to run a little bit lower tire pressure because he's got less weight on those tires. So it's, as much as it's equipment dependent, it's also body weight dependent a little bit. So, but please go back to the bike shop that you got this bike from, if you got it from a bike shop, and the mechanics there, they know what they're doing. A lot of times the mechanics of bike shops are like avid cyclists, and they're usually really up to date with what kind of tire you're running and what sort of pressure it should look like. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question, Devin. Thank you for that question. Okay, James says, how do I choose what Ironman to do? There are so many. James, you're living in the golden age of the Ironman. There are so many events, and you're right. It's a little overwhelming. I have a few different things to say about this. The first is, if you're getting into this, you're going to pick an Ironman to do in a year. It's new, it's special. You want to check it off a bucket list. I would pick an Ironman that has a couple different things. The first is that it suits your style of athlete, let's say. So let's say you've been riding a bike for a long time. You're really comfortable on the bike, and you love climbing hills. Well, maybe you could pick an Ironman that's a bit hilly, because it'll exaggerate that strength. You'll have a lot more fun with it, and it'll be good for you. But let's say you're brand new, and you're not really sure if the Ironman, if you're actually even going to get through the Ironman. It might be a little wiser to pick a course that's a little more forgiving, a little flatter, a little less vertical gain and loss. So that's one factor. I always like to encourage people for that first one to pick an Ironman that's within, within a traveling range that takes out as much of the logistical pain in the butt as possible. For example, I live in Victoria, BC in Canada, West Coast. If it was my very first Ironman, if somebody lived here and they want to do an Ironman, I would strongly discourage them to do an Ironman that involves flying with their bike overseas, multiple time changes. There's just so much that can go wrong. I would encourage them to pick an Ironman that they could drive to. So we have like Ironman Coeur d'Alene that you can drive to. We have Ironman Penticton. There's like, Ironman as Arizona is fairly close. You might have to fly to that one. But pick something in a similar time zone with a similar climate that requires less logistical things that can go wrong. Does that make sense? There's just, maybe you've been doing this for 10 years, you're just checking Ironmans off the list. You're using it as a form of kind of sport tourism, we call it. So you take your family, you make a vacation out of it, and you've done the Ironmans all in your vicinity, and now you want to go and experience one overseas. Yeah, go for it. That's awesome. But for those first ones, pick something that's close to home, similar climate, similar time change, not going from sea level to altitude to do this thing. Take out as much of those variables as possible so that you're not, setting yourself up for, a rough ride. Does that make sense? And yeah, the cool thing about the Ironman brand in particular is that it really is a global brand now. When I started racing, there might have been 10 Ironman events on the entire planet. And now, I don't even want to know that. I'm sure it'd be easy to find out the number, probably 100. When you include the 70.3 events, the half Ironman events, there's probably upwards of 100 events that you can pick from. And it truly is global. You can be Canada, US, Mexico, overseas, South America, China, Japan, like you can go anywhere. It's pretty awesome. I coach a fair number of people that really use this as a way to travel with their families. So they'll go there, they'll arrive a few days before the race, they'll do the race, and then they'll spend a week or two after checking out that country. It's a really fun way to see it and to also, do an Ironman at the same time. So good question, James. James then follows that up and says, should I do strength training? Yeah. So James, this is a question I get a lot from people. And what I will say is, if you're going to do a triathlon, the priorities have to be swim, bike, run. And for most people who have a family and work, that's enough. That's a lot to tackle. That's a lot of workouts. Ideally, and I always think people need to get 3 exposures at least in each sport each week. So now we're up to 9 workouts, right? So obviously on the weekend, maybe you're going to do a couple on those days. If you can only fit in one during the normal work week. So where are you going to fit strength training in? Now, let's say you have a really flexible job, or, maybe you have the time to fit in strength training. Then strength training is incredibly valuable, in my opinion. Not everybody feels the same way, but I think the stronger the foundation you have, the stronger the body you have, the more you can do with it. So if you have the time in your life to do strength training without going from 8 hours of sleep a night to 4 hours of sleep a night because you're trying to cram it in, that's not the way to create time. The way to create time is if you actually have the time to recover after. So my point is, strength training should be probably a distant priority to swim, bike, run. However, I'm a huge believer in if you can't do like a proper dedicated strength training session a couple of times a week, what you can do is tack on a 10 to 15 minute core and hip stability routine 2 or 3 times a week. So maybe you go for a run, the run takes 45 minutes, and you commit 15 to 20 minutes right after that run to do a little bit of core work, a little bit of hip stability work. So working some of those, stabilizer muscles around your hips so that when you get deep into the, triathlon run, you don't break down technically. You're really kind of strong in the core and hip area. That, I would say, you have to do your very best to work that in if you can't do proper strength training. So, yeah, it's like always, it has multiple answers depending on what your life situation is like. It's a great question though. Aiden. Oh, Aiden. Hey, Aiden. Gosh, didn't even notice you joined us. Thanks, Aiden. Nice to see you. Aiden says, I've seen a few alternative triathlon events like paddleboard, bike, and run. Are these events common, and do you consider them to be triathlons? Well, yes and no. I mean, I think anytime people put, string together multiple sports, like there used to be the adventure racing that would have, paddling and trail running and mountain biking. And I suppose the very definition of triathlon is three. Tri means three, like a tricycle or a triangle. So if you're stringing together three different sports, I suppose that counts as a triathlon. This might be a question in terms of the trademark things. I don't know if the World Triathlon Organization or the ITU, the International Triathlon Union, has trademarked triathlon. I'm not sure. I'm sure if you Googled or asked ChatGPT what a triathlon is, they would probably say it's swim, bike, and run. And so maybe there is a clear definition that it must be swim, bike, and run, but I don't think so. There's lots of different versions of sports. There was winter triathlon that came around for a while. I actually competed for a couple of years in winter triathlon events, and that was a run on snow in this order: run, and then you would mountain bike, and then you would cross country ski, and it was all on snow, like on cross country ski trails. And they called that a winter triathlon. So, does a paddleboard, bike, and run count as a triathlon? I suppose, unless, somebody has trademarked or, there's been a declaration that the pure version of triathlon is swim, bike, run, but I don't think so. I think if, you're doing these events, it's great. And I love that stuff. Why not? Why not string together multiple sports? It's really, really fun. There's just a big event here on Vancouver Island. It's called MOMAR, Mind Over Mountain Adventure Race. More events than a triathlon. I think they do mountain biking, they do running, they do paddling. Maybe that's the three. I don't know. Anyway, it's not a triathlon, but it's multiple sports strung together. And, I think that's kind of fun. But again, I think if you did Google what is a triathlon, you're probably going to get the answer that it's swimming, biking, and running. That would be my guess. But can you paddleboard, bike, and run? Yeah, go for it. I think you can do whatever you want. Ironman, on the other hand, will have words to say about that. Ironman is a trademarked, branded company. And, when you say Ironman, they're talking about something very specific, which is swimming, biking, and running, very specific distances. A half Ironman, likewise, would be half that distance. They've branded that to be a 70.3, which is the total distance that you cover through swim, bike, and run. So Ironman's a little different. When you say Ironman, it means something very, very specific in terms of distances. So great questions. It looks like maybe we don't have any more questions. I think that might be it. We'll give you a couple minutes. If you do want to pop another question in there, feel free. Reminder that these are recorded. I said at the beginning, please check them out. You want to check them out in the My Endurance Hub space. In the back end, we also have master classes with incredible presenters. These are covering topics like nutrition, sports psychology, recovery, physiology. Really great stuff there. We have daily endurance moments to check out. These are like little 2 to 3 minute tips that you can sink your teeth into every day to keep you motivated. We have an incredible community growing. There's so much great content, lots of different blog posts on everything endurance sports. So please check it out. Really encourage you to. Lots of great info there. We got one more question here from Devin. Do you have the Ironman tattoo? What do you think about that? Do I need to complete one to get one? Oh, Devin, that's a great question. I love it. The answer is no. And it's not, it's just I've never had a desire to get a tattoo. But I have lots of friends that have, and it definitely is a real source of pride for people to get that tattoo. I would say, yes, you probably should complete an Ironman before you get one of those. I think that would be, I don't know, maybe not a little, I don't know what the right word is. I think that'd be a bit of an imposter if you did that. I think you should complete an Ironman and then get one if you want to. What I find amazing about the Ironman tattoos is I can't think of any other brands that people will tattoo on themselves. I mean, I've seen the odd Nike swoosh, but it's rare that people get a brand tattooed on. But I think what's really cool about it is that people are just so incredibly proud that they got through that, and it's like a little badge of honor. So no, I have never, but again, it's not, it's just that I've never had desire to get a tattoo. I'm kind of scared of needles, truth be told. But again, lots of my friends have, and there's some really creative ones. The company Lululemon, actually, for a number of years, I think we're offering free Ironman tattoos at their stores. If they had a store in the location where the Ironman took place. I think at Ironman Whistler when it was up there, Ironman Canada was in Whistler for a bit. I think you could go to the Ironman store and they had tattoo artists there who would, put the Ironman logo on you for free. I think they're doing it. They are genius marketers because, and of course, you get like a few hundred people in their store probably buying lots of stuff too. So it was a smart move. Um, uh, and Devin follows it up with, how much would you require to get the tattoo in cash? Are you asking me like how much you'd have to pay me for me to get it? I'll take that question as that way. Well, it'd probably take a fair bit. Bit scared of needles, but everybody has their price, Devin. Name your price, and I'll let you know. Oh, yes, Devin says yes. How much would I'll think about it. At next question and answer, we can negotiate, but the price will be very high. I have a couple of kids. $100, no. Too low, too low. You gotta add like 5 zeros. Now I'm getting greedy. I love it. Yeah, to be continued. Thanks, Devin. I like that. That was a fun back and forth. Anyway, it looks like that might be it for our questions. This has been great. As always, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And we'll be here next week. Oh, wait, no, next week's Thanksgiving in Canada. Anyway, Canadian Thanksgiving. So I'll talk to my bosses and see what they're saying about next week. Oh, $1 million, I'm in. Where do you want it? Forehead? I just got offered $1 million to put a tattoo, and I offered my forehead. That was really dumb. Low back. Yeah, thanks, Devin. Thanks so much for coming, you guys. Really appreciate it, and have a really awesome week. Happy training, everybody.